Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet and you are watching a new episode on the Wojennik TV channel. I would like to show you today a review of one of the games that I have recently played, but this is not a new game. It is a game published back in 2011. I have already shown it on our channel a few months ago. We wargamers sometimes tend to buy or to acquire games and to stock them on our shelves in order to watch them, in order to anticipate gameplay, but very often those games tend to stick on those shelves for an unlimited time. And the game that I will show you today, which is Fighting Formations Großdeutschland Motorized Infantry Division, is such a game when it comes to me, because I have acquired this game back in 2012 or 11. It was not a game acquired through the P500 system. I bought it a little later in one of the Polish shops during a sale. But this game has spent about 6 or 7 years on my shelf, and finally a few months ago I decided to give it a try. I decided to open it and to play it. The game was, as I said earlier, published in 2011, and it is a game created by Chad Jensen. So this is a very well-known designer, a designer who created, for instance, Combat Commando, Europe, Pacific, Urban Sprawl or Dominant Species. It is one of my favorite designers, so quite frankly I had big expectations. I had huge expectations concerning Fighting Formations. For several reasons I have kept this game unplayed for such a long time, but when I did decide to play it I had high expectations. Furthermore, this is a game which when it was published created quite some buzz, because it is not a standard war game. It is a war game, as in most of Chad Jensen's designs, where we will find new mechanisms, intriguing new mechanisms, and many people were saying that this game, this series of games, because Fighting Formations is meant to be a series, will be a new standard when it comes to wargaming. It will show new paths, it will create new trends. Did it really happen? I will try to explain it during this video. When it comes to this game, it is the first opus in the Fighting Formations series, and it concentrates on the German Großdeutschland Motorized Infantry Division. From the day when this game was published, we already had an expansion for this game, because the basic game, the core game, concentrates on the early path of this formation. The expansion concentrates on the battle for Kharkov in 1943. So it helps us to recreate additional battles which weren't covered in this series. Will we see any other games in this series? Well, I have already read that a new game, the second game of this series, is being prepared. Maybe it will be presented on the P500 in the months to come. Or who can tell, maybe when this video comes online, it is already present on the P500 list. The game is meant to be played by 2 players. The length of the game really depends on the scenario, because we receive several scenarios, interesting scenarios, and their time of play will be different, because those will be different scenarios with different scale, with different number of units and objectives. So I would like to show you now how this game looks, then I would like to explain how this game works, and finally I would like to tell what are my opinions about this title. Let's begin. Here is Fighting Formations Großdeutschland Motorized Infantry Division in all its glory. What you can see is one of the smallest scenarios found in this game, because in Fighting Formations in this opus we receive several scenarios, and we receive also many maps on which those scenarios can be played. Here you see a small scale map. It's the map numbered with the eighth number, but we receive also several others. Those maps are bigger, they take more place than this one, so when choosing the scenario that you want to play, you really have a great variety of scenarios. You can choose smaller ones, you can choose bigger ones. Those maps are, as in most war games, covered by a hexagonal grid. Those hexes are quite large, but due to the fact that we will be using several counters on those hexes will become crowded. It's not a very big issue, but I have already seen cases when those hexes seem to be not big enough. Those maps are covered with different types of terrain, so we receive crops, roads, buildings, towns, woods, etc. It all depends on the scenario played. Apart from the maps, a very important part of the game is the track display and the order matrix. The central part of this additional track is the order matrix, because Fighting Formations is a special game in which we will be using a special order matrix. On this matrix we have different kinds of orders, both Soviet orders and German orders, ranked from 1 to 10. As you can see, those orders can be different on different levels. For instance, on the level 7, the Germans have a sniper order, whereas the Soviets have an assault order. This is a difference, a major difference, because it influences the choices that both players will be making during play when they will be choosing the order cubes, the initiative cubes. Those orders will be then executed after having chosen such a cube. So when a player has the initiative, he will be able to choose one of those cubes, pay a certain amount of initiative points according to the place where this cube is being taken from, and then he will be able to execute the order from which this cube was taken, or any order beneath this place. Very intelligent idea and very interesting mechanisms. What we receive on this track is also, first of all, a time track, where we will be counting the time using the turn marker, where we will be verifying sudden death. When the turn reaches the sudden death place, we will be making sudden death rolls in order to verify if the game ends. Then we will also receive some spaces where command tokens will be placed, command counters will be placed. Those counters are double-sided, and they are mission command counters and tactical command counters. The 0 and the 1 are the numbers of initiative points that a player will have to pay in order to activate a unit in the command radius of such a counter. And those counters will be placed on the map, then they will be replaced on this track on the pending command box, then placed to the available command. So it will be a special type of cycle. On the second part of the same track, we will receive, first of all, a place for the used order cubes, which will be transferred from the order track. Then a command and control track where we will be placing our command radius counters in order to indicate the radius of our command. Then a Soviet command track where we will be placing the Soviet counters, a small space for the air support counter. On the other part of the track there will be also a sniper place, and we will also receive a short explanation of how to proceed when we have the initiative. So what are the steps taken? On the left of the track, we also receive an end of turn procedure where we can easily and rapidly verify the different steps taken at the end of each turn. A very important part of this track is also the initiative track, where a special red pawn will be moved. This pawn is moved to the left or to the right, depending on who pays the cost of an action. When choosing an action from the order matrix, a player has to pay the exact number of initiative points that this cube occupied, in accordance to the space this cube occupied. So if we take a cube from the 3 space, we will have to pay 3 initiative points. If this is the German time to play, and it is because this pawn is on the German part of the track, he will have to pay 3 points and to move this pawn to the right. Accordingly, each time a player activates units in order to do some actions with them, he will have to pay additional points. If those units are close to a mission command counter, this will be free, but if it is close to a tactical command counter, it will be 1 point to the right. If we activate a unit out of command, it will cost 2 points. At some point, this pawn will reach the other part of the track, and at this point, the opponent, in this case the Soviet player, will be able to choose his own cube in order to do a new action. If this pawn reaches 0, then normally that would be considered a draw, but in order to decide who should choose the next cube, we will be using the Fate card. It's a special card in this game, first of all used in order to break the special tie when it comes to the initiative track. The player holding this card has always the initiative in such a case, but this card has also another very important purpose. The player holding this card can decide to reroll, to order a reroll of any roll made during the game. So if a roll made by us or by our opponent is something that we would like to avoid or to redo, then we can give this card to our opponent in order to force such a reroll. Additionally, if the game ends in a tie, the holder of the Fate card is declared the winner. So it's a powerful tool. You should be using it very carefully during gameplay. This is only one of the cards that we will find in fighting formations, but we have several others. Those cards are cards found in 2 asset decks, in the German asset deck and in the Soviet asset deck. Both sides will have their own deck of cards, in which we will find both orders and reaction cards. Orders will be used during our own turn, using a special action, the asset action, enabling us to play a card from our hand, but we will also find reactions used when the card enables us to use it. Sometimes it will be a reaction to an opponent's attack, in order to an assault or to a move. The card each time will tell us when this card can be used. Apart cards, we will be of course using counters, and we receive several ones in fighting formations. Those counters will be first of all representing units, because we will receive both vehicles and infantry, and secondly we receive a lot of different markers used to indicate different information during the game. Now, how the counters look like? First of all, we receive vehicles, which are bigger counters, longer counters, which occupy at most times all the hex they are placed they are placed into. Those vehicles can be of two different sizes. We can receive platoons and squads. Platoons can become squads due to casualties or due to our own decision to divide our unit to smaller ones. Those counters are, first of all, counters which have some parameters. They have first of all an attack parameter against vehicles, against armored units, an attack factor against infantry, against guns, against units using morale, so against soft targets. The smaller number is the range of such a unit, so we can shoot at a specific distance, but we can also shoot at twice this distance. We receive a negative modifier while doing so. The A indicates that there is a special action associated with this unit described in the playbook. The middle information is the rate of fire, telling us what is the probability that such a unit will become spent while executing return fire. If the parameter is a small one, the probability of such a failure is smaller than if this parameter is bigger. The last parameter on the bottom right is the defense factor, both against attacks coming from the front and from the rear. At this time we will be using the smaller parameter. The small dot on the up right corner tells us that this unit has a loose arc of fire, which means that it is a turreted unit and it can shoot at 360 degrees. Other vehicles, for instance German Stugs, will have a strict arc of fire, which means that such a unit will be able to shoot only at it forwards arc. Now those counters are double-sided, but what differentiates the counters from fighting formations from different games is the fact that while returning this counter to the other side, we will returning it in a different manner than in other games. In other games, in order to return the unit and to see the second part of the counter, we are flipping it in this way. As you can see, in fighting formations we will be flipping it that way. This is quite an interesting thing, and I think it's brilliant, because while sitting opposite one to another during play, it is much more easier to turn this counter in such a way. But of course you have to get used to do so. As you can see, the reverse side of the counter does not indicate a reduced unit, because steps are not counted in fighting formations in the same way that in other games. The white stripe indicates that the unit is activated, so it's not a different step, it's the fact that the unit becomes activated. And while activated, this unit also has a new parameter. It's the movement factor, which can be of one of three colors. It can be green, it can be blue or purple and red. Blue or purple indicates that this is a tracked unit, and it will be using the track section of the movement table. If such a unit has a green factor, it will be a leg unit. If such a unit has a red movement factor, it will be using the part governing wheeled units on the movement table. Smaller units, smaller counters, serve to present infantry units. for instance, German grenadier units. Those units, as you can see, lack certain information that were present on the bigger vehicle counters, but they are still also double-sided. They are platoons, they are squads, and they have different parameters used during gameplay. What we receive are also other counters used in order to play. We have a turn track counter, we have a sudden death counter, we have several counters used to track smoke on the battlefield, we have several counters used to track spent units, and we have also casualty counters. Those counters are double-sided. Now, while looking at them, we have the impression that we have already seen them somewhere else. And this somewhere else is Conflict of Heroes, where also casualties, hits are indicated while drawing by drawing casualty counters. But the difference between fighting formations and Conflict of Heroes is that we will be using one counter both for vehicles and for infantry units. This counter is double-sided, so if we want to draw a casualty, a hit marker for a vehicle, we just use the vehicle part of this counter. If we want to use such a counter for a non-infantry unit, we are using this side. The number of information is also smaller than in Conflict of Heroes. We have, first of all, sometimes a letter indicating the capacity, the ability of the unit, which cannot be used while this counter is beside such a unit. For instance, an F indicates that the unit cannot fire at other units. The second parameter on the bottom, on the up right, indicates the number which will have to be rolled on the dice, with the dice, in order to rally this unit. The smaller the number, the easier it is to rally such a unit. A black number indicates that even if such a rally try fails, nothing happens. Some counters will have a red parameter indicating that in case of a failure during rally, such a unit will be eliminated. Because in fighting formations we will be tracking hits with those counters. If a unit has a hit counter, it's its first hit. If it receives a second hit, it is eliminated, but not always the unit will be destroyed and removed entirely from the game, because if the destroyed unit was a platoon, the unit will be split into several squads. Only one of the squads will be destroyed, one squad will remain with a hit marker, and one will become totally fresh. So those platoons will be degrading during gameplay. They will be changed to squads, which further during gameplay can be eliminated because a squad hit 2 times is just destroyed. Now, apart from the counters, apart from other elements, in fighting formations we will be also using dice, because many of the mechanisms will be using dice, and those dice will be of different types. We will receive standard 6-sided dice, we will receive 8-sided dice, 10, 12, 20-sided dice. The type of dice rolled will be depending on the mechanism and on the modifiers, because we will be modifying the types of die using during shots, during rally attempts. We will be not adding additional points to the firepower or defense factor. We will be modifying the type of dice used. Finally, in fighting formations we also receive 2 player aid charts. First of all, a player aid chart where we will be verifying the types of terrain, the movement costs, the influence on line of sight or cover. On the second side of this card, we'll receive information governing melee. Then we will receive also a player aid tracking sighting marker and fortifications, explaining how to read the information on those counters, special actions, the direct fire attacks procedure, and on the second side we'll receive also information about the barrage procedure and the effects of such a barrage, both by artillery or air bombardment. The last elements are two documents. First of all, the series rulebook, and secondly, the playbook. And again, once again, I must say that rules written by Chad Jensen are just top notch. It's one of the maybe 3 best designers, best persons when it comes to the rules reduction, and I am glad that GMT Games decided not so long ago to further exploit this special Chad Jensen's skill in order to prepare or to supervise the preparation of rules for our games. Now, the rules are pretty straightforward. They are prepared in color with a nice set of illustrations. Those rules, even if complicated, because sometimes we will be facing new mechanisms, are so well written, so well put into place that we will not have absolutely any doubt how to interpret them, and then where to find those rules if we happen to have any questions during gameplay. The same applies to the playbook, where we will find several scenarios with a historical introduction, with precise information on how to prepare a scenario, what are the victory conditions, what is the deployment, what are the special rules, what units to use, etc. Then we will also receive several examples of the basic mechanisms of fighting formations. So we will receive explanations of how fire arcs, pivoting work, direct fire, etc., etc. Very interesting read. For the real geeks, we also receive a historical explanation and an order of battle of the entire Großdeutschland Motorized Infantry Division. Have fun with it. That's it when it comes to the components of fighting formations. Now I would like to explain how this game works. What is this order matrix? Like, and what are the basic mechanisms? The central part of the mechanisms of fighting formations is the order matrix. The first thing that we always take a look at is the location of the initiative pawn, or of the pawn on the initiative track. And the player on whose part of the track this pawn is located has the possibility to choose one of the actions on the order matrix. Those orders are numbered from 1 to 10. The number located on each spot tells us what will be the cost of such an order and how those orders work. The first one is the asset order. The asset order is an order enabling us to play one of our cards that we have in our hand. Those cards, as I have shown you earlier, are divided into order cards and reaction cards. And while choosing this order, the asset order, we can choose one of our cards with the word order on it in order to play it. Those cards are one-time effects. They are also explained in the playbook, but I didn't have any doubt how to use them because the text on them is very straightforward and it's using all the mechanisms described in the rules. So if you have any doubt, you can check them in the playbook, but I won't believe that will happen very often. This is an action which doesn't require to activate any units unless the card says so, but you have to pay for it, and the price is 1 point. So while using this action, we have to place this pawn, to move this pawn 1 space towards our opponent. If the pawn is still on our part of the track after using the order, the cube is being placed onto the used order cubes spot, we can choose a new cube in order to do an action. And the second one is fire on the German side. As you can see, on the Soviet side, the number 2 is movement. So both sides will have different orders on the second and third space of the track. That this difference was explained by Chad Jensen in the rules or in the playbook. It was meant to simulate the tactics used by both sides during World War II. Germans tended to fire, to use their firepower in order to pin their opponents, whereas the Soviets tended to move closer to the enemies in order to overrun them or to enter into melee. So this differentiation is simulating this different approach to tactics. The fire order is a fire which will first of all cost us 2 activation points on the track, but secondly it will also require us to activate a certain number of units. Now this activation will be done first of all thanks to command tokens, command counters, because in order to activate units cheaply we will have to use such markers. At the beginning of this scenario, as you can see, Germans have some units on the south side of the board, whereas Soviet units are somewhere hidden. I haven't explained it, but one of the interesting mechanisms in fighting formations is the sighting and the hidden markers mechanism. In some scenarios, one or even both sides, one side for sure, will have a certain number of sighting markers. As soon as such a marker is being shot at and it is unveiled, we can verify what was underneath such a marker. Some of them are false sightings. They are just removed from the board. They are just dummies. But some others are, for instance, roadblocks, other types of fortification, or even hidden units. At the beginning of each scenario, a player who possesses such counters has to attribute to each of such a counter a certain number of units. He can do it freely, and if we run into a hidden counter with the B letter on it, we will place on the board at this very moment the units hidden under this big B counter. So in this case, a gun and a rifle unit. Those units will appear on the board where the hidden marker was discovered. Very nice, very neat mechanism. So in order to fire, we have to have some units in a distance and with line of sight to our opponents. In order to shoot, we first have to activate our units, and this activation can be free, so it can cost us 0 initiative points if we have a token, a mission command token in the distance, at a distance which will enable us to freely activate our units. Normally, the command radius will be 2 or 3 squares. It all depends on what the scenario says. For instance, here the Germans have a command radius of 3 hexes. So each and every unit in a distance of 3 hexes of a mission command marker can be freely activated in order to fire or even to move. So in this case, both units here and the 3rd Grenadier unit will also be freely activated. But if this mission command token was placed elsewhere, the 2 units here would be activated freely. The 3rd unit, the Grenadier unit, would be out of command. In order to activate such a unit, we have to pay 2 initiative points. Those units, those tokens will degrade. At the end of each turn they will be flipped and they will become tactical command counters, which will require to pay 1 point of initiative in order to activate a unit in our command radius. At the end of a turn where a tactical command exists, it will be removed from the game. It will be placed in the pending command square, and we will have to wait 1 full turn in order to reacquire such a token. Then we will be able to re-enter it into play and to place it on the board freely with one of our units. If we want to activate those units, so we have to pay a certain number of initiative points as explained earlier, and this price is being paid in the same way as choosing a cube from the order matrix. We have to move the pawn in the direction of our opponent's part of the track. Activating units means also flipping them, so they will be flipped in such a way to indicate that those units will be the active units and we can act with them during this order. Firing at other units will require us to roll some dice, and opposingly to most war games, those dice will be rolled both by the attacker and by the defender. We should verify the distance at which we are shooting. Each weapon has a certain range. If we shoot at a bigger distance but less than the double of this distance, we will have a negative modifier. We can even shoot at a longer range, acquiring an even bigger negative modifier. Those modifiers do not change, do not modify the result of our die roll. They will modify the type of die that we will be using. At first, we always start from a roll of 2 10-sided dice, but because of some effects, because of some conditions, we can receive a negative or we can receive a positive modifier. For instance, at a long range, we will have a -1d modifier. Shooting at a short range, we will receive a +1d modifier. What this means? The -1d means that those 2 10-sided dice will degrade and become 8-sided dice. A -2d modifier starting from 10-sided dice will grant us only 6-sided dice. On the other hand, if we happen to receive a positive modifier, those 10-sided dice will become 12-sided dice. If we receive an additional positive modifier, we will be rolling 2 20-sided dice. So that's a neat idea, that's an interesting mechanism. As I said earlier, in most war games we have a combat resolution table, we have modifiers which modify the die roll. Here we modify the type of die that we are using. After determining the final type of die, we make a dice roll, and we verify if any of those 2 results is equal or smaller than the hindrance taken into account during such a fire. Because while tracing line of sight, we will always check if this line of sight passes through hexes with hindrance, for instance through smoke counters. The basic hindrance is always 1, so if we roll a 1, we will miss, not even making the sum of our attack. It won't matter, the 1 negates this attack. If we have a smoke counter, the shot will have to be bigger than 5 in order to each result on the die will have to be bigger than 5 in order to hit our opponent. But hitting our opponent doesn't mean that we will draw a hit counter. First of all, after rolling the die, we make a sum of the die rolls and we add it to our firepower. While attacking vehicles, we will be using the black firepower and the black backgrounded firepower. If we attack leg units, we will be using the bottom white backgrounded firepower, and this sum will be compared to a defense factor, which will be the result of a die roll of 2 10-sided dice roll and the defense factor of such a unit. If this unit has any cover, for instance in a forest, we will also add the cover factor indicated in the terrain chart. For instance, for the forest, for the woods, it would be a +2. If the result of the attacker is greater or equal to the defense total, it is a miss. If the defense total is less than the attack total, the unit is being hit. If the unit is fresh, so it doesn't has any hit markers, we randomly choose one and we give it to the unit, modifying sometimes its capabilities, lowering its capabilities. If such a unit already had a hit marker, we eliminate the unit. If it was a platoon, we will replace it with 2 squads. One of them will be a fresh squad, the other one will be a squad with the very same hit number as earlier. If it was a squad with a hit marker, it is eliminated permanently from the board. After shooting at a unit, the opposing player has the possibility to return fire. The procedure is pretty much the same. We just choose the target of our attack. We make some dice roll. The difference is only that while throwing the die, will also compare the result not only to the hindrance marker, to the hindrance value, but also to the rate of fire in the middle of each counter. If the result is equal or less than the rate of fire, the unit will become spent, so it will not be able to return fire against other attacking units during the same activation. After shooting with each of our activated units, we flip them over and this activation is ended. The spent marker is also removed. We return to the order matrix and to the initiative track. We verify once more where the initiative pawn is being located. Because it is on the German side of the track, the German player has the possibility to choose a new cube and to execute a new order. The movement order is pretty much straightforward. There is no zone of control in fighting formations. We just move our units from one hex to another, paying a price indicated by the terrain chart. We have 3 different types of movement factors: leg units, we have track units and wheeled units. Each of them will have their own column with a specific number of movement points required to be paid while moving. During movement, our opponent has the possibility to do opportunity fire. The rules are absolutely the same as when it comes to return fire, with a possibility that the unit will be spent. Then we have the rally order, which enables us to try to get rid of the hit markers attributed to our units. We have to activate units, then we have to do rally tests in order to remove those counters. The assault order enables us to move and fire with activated units, but with a negative modifier during the combat resolution. The advance order enables us to move one hex without the risk of being shot at, because there is no opportunity fire during such a movement. Then the sniper order will enable us to try to destroy one of the opponent's activation command tokens on the board, and it will also enable us to execute one of the orders beneath the sniper order on the order track. The three last orders, so division support, regiment support, battalion support, will enable us to draw new cards from the deck. So those actions are very expensive, but they also grant us the possibility to acquire some new cards, and those cards can be pretty powerful, so it's worth acquiring them. Those are pretty much the basic mechanisms of fighting formations. Of course, there are many other rules which govern the game. There are rules concerning mastering units or special rules governing pivoting our vehicles, fire arcs, smoke markers, fortification markers, etc., etc. But now I would prefer to explain what were my feelings during plays of fighting formations, what I believe are the strong points of this game, and what are its weaknesses. Fighting Formations Großdeutschland Motorized Infantry Division is a game published by GMT Games in the same standard that many of its other games. So it is a game of high quality. We receive high quality components. First of all, maps, counters, rulebooks, dice, and all of them are just looking great. I like the counters because they are very functional. Some people said that they do not like the perspective from which the units are being shown on those counters, but being frank, this is just a question of individual preference. Some people will prefer the perspective used in fighting formations, some other people will prefer a different one, so this is really a subjective question. The most important thing is that those counters are really very functional, and that is just the way that it should be. If we are trying to find something that isn't top-notch when it comes to the quality of the components, those will be the cards, because although we receive cards which are very functional, which are very easy to understand and to use, their quality is not the same as in many other GMT titles or even other companies' titles, because those cards are not sufficiently sturdy, so they will change their shape. Mine were already bent a little bit from the beginning, but this is just a detail. I like the quality of the rules because we received 2 big rule books, and as in all of Chad Jensen's designs, those rule books are excellent. We can easily understand how the game works. We can easily understand what the designer or why the designer decided to introduce some mechanisms into the system. We can easily then prepare a game, prepare a scenario, easily set up the game. So this is really great. I love Chad Jensen's rulebooks. I believe that this is one of the designers or people responsible for rulebooks on the market which are the best in what they are doing. And I would recommend beginners or designers who want to create new games to look at how he writes the rules, because even if some mechanisms are more complicated than others, they are presented in such an easy, an understandable way that we have absolutely no doubt how to play the game later. I like the fact that Jensen decided to introduce new mechanisms into the game. So we receive, for instance, an interesting mechanism concerning the initiative. We receive something of a game inside a game on this initiative track, because while choosing the order for our activation, we have to carefully plan how many initiative points, command points we will be spending in order to keep the initiative or in order to exploit some local advantages. So we will have carefully plan and decide which order to choose from the matrix. And this matrix, the heart of the game, is also a unique design, a unique mechanism introduced in fighting formations. Now, I have said that at the beginning, when this game was published, many players said that this game will create new mechanisms. It will be a thing that a game that will create new paths in the philosophy of war games design. Was this really the case? I think not, because after 8 years, this game was published in 2011. We can easily judge by the titles, by the most common mechanisms used in war games, if the mechanisms used in fighting formations were copied, were used by other designers, and unfortunately or fortunately not. This concerns especially the order matrix. Now, the idea of the order matrix was to additionally influence the decisions made by the players, where they had to choose the order in such a way to gain local advantage and to avoid giving the initiative to your opponent. So the idea was to carefully choose the order in order to receive some benefits and to harm your opponent. Is this really the case? Well, the idea is interesting, but then when we play the game, we see that very often we will be just choosing the same order every turn. It will cost a little bit more because we will have to choose a cube which will be higher on the matrix, but then we will execute an order lower, for instance, the fire order or the movement order, which will which will be the thing that will be wanting to do in that very precise moment. So on paper it looks great. We think that there will be a great diversity when it comes to the orders, but then when we play, we see that this diversity is something very theoretical. In the practical world, we will be choosing very often the same order. So the matrix will be a thing, a nice looking thing, but a thing that will be very abstract. Some wargamers said that this matrix is so abstract that it doesn't cope with the wargaming philosophy of design. I do not agree with such a statement, but I believe that this matrix maybe should have been designed a little bit differently. Maybe there should have been included some sections in this matrix from which we have to choose the order, because currently we can choose a cube from the top of the matrix and do all of the actions, one of those actions chosen without any restrictions. If this matrix was divided into 3 or 4 sections and we for instance had to choose from 3 orders, maybe this decisional process would be more interesting. Having said that, I believe it's an original mechanism, a thing that deserves to be mentioned because it is something that stands out. It's something which is unique when it comes to fighting formations. I like additional new mechanisms used by Johnson in this design. We have, for instance, the sighting markers, which in my private opinion are the best mechanism in this game. I love the fact that in a very simple way this mechanism of spotting something new was introduced to the game. We received the bigger marker which will cover our hidden forces, and then our opponent will have to spot our hidden forces entering into contact with some sighting markers. It's something very nicely designed, very elegant and very easy to use. I like rules governing, for instance, crews which can bail out from from burning or abandoned vehicles. I like rules governing additional special capabilities of units. So from that point of view, the game is interesting, it is elegant, it is also very clever. I like the fact that we receive different and many scenarios. We can play shorter ones, we can play longer ones. We receive a great diversity of units and of tactical situations. Those are the strong points of this title. So what are the weaker points of this title? I have already spoken a little bit about the order metrics, so I won't be repeating that. Another issue, in my opinion, is the length of the game. It is still a tactical game. We should not forget it. But the length of some scenarios is really long. And this is due to two mechanisms used in this system. The first one is the system which permits players to split their units. So we have one counter and suddenly we receive three counters of the same unit, which was split into three due to enemy fire, due to casualties, or due to our own tactical decision. It's something not unique when it comes to fighting formations, because we have many other games where this mechanism is being used, but in fighting formations, a tactical game, this mechanism influences gameplay, influences the length of the game, because it makes games last very much longer. The second aspect is the fact that we have a specific, very unique, not maybe very unique, but a specific system of combat resolution. In this system, both players will be throwing dice, and we will be throwing dice often and very heavily. We receive many kinds of dice. I like the fact that we can influence the type of dice that we will be using during combat, but I do not quite like the idea that both players will have to roll dice in order to resolve combat. I understand that this increases the level of engagement of the second player during our opponent's activation, but this is a game in which the initiative will be really switching from one player to another very dynamically. So I do not quite like the idea of engaging additionally the second player just to throw some dice, so some dice during combat resolution. Many games just use single die roll resolution systems, and I believe they work better because they are faster and they are less complicated. It's a Chad Jensen game, so I was a little bit surprised that he decided to include this system where both players will be rolling dice. I believe that he will be using some elegant and simple mechanisms. This one is something quite bizarre in a Chad Jensen's game, but of course some players can say that they like it, it's interesting. I do not have a problem in using this. I just believe it could have been designed a little bit differently. I have already said about the matrix, I have already said about the cards. So having said that, I would like to underline that fighting formations is really a unique, a special type of game. It is not a game that will suit everyone, because it is a game with this matrix, which is really the heart of the game, which is something a little bit next to a war game design. So we have some Euro-logical elements incorporated into a war game. It really works nicely, but I believe that it will not suit everyone. I like the fact that we have a different perspective than in many other war games, because we do not have a battle, a campaign. We have a formation, a unit, and we can recreate the battles in which this unit took part. So from this point of view, it's really an interesting title with some interesting and unique mechanisms which were meant to be so new, so refreshing that they will influence the way that future war games will be designed. it was not the case, but it was not the case, but it is still a solid design, a solid game for tactical geeks who like to throw dice, who like to have many units on the board, because if we play longer scenarios, we will really have many units which will then split into other units, which will receive status markers, etc., etc. So we will have really a counter feast on the board. It's an interesting design, so if you are looking for something original, Fighting Formations might be a good idea. This was Fighting Formations Großdeutschland Motorized Infantry Division from GMT Games. Thank you a lot for watching this video. Take a look at our materials. We have some reviews, some unboxing videos. I hope you will have a great day and see you next time. Bye.